What is up, guys? Matt McAdam here, your truck editor at Driving Line, with another awesome episode of Chasing Dust. And today I'm coming at you live from the middle of nowhere. Just kidding, we're in a dirt parking lot behind Costco. Today's episode is going to be about comparing and contrasting a long travel suspension system with a mid-travel suspension system, specifically on the Toyota platform, and more specifically on the Toyota Tacoma platform. I've got behind me here two Toyota Tacomas, each with different suspension setups on there, and I know that a lot of you guys out there are contemplating modifying your vehicles and you don't really know which way to go with it. Do I go mid-travel? Do I go long travel? Do I need long travel? Is mid-travel going to be enough for what I want to do? So today we're going to dive into that topic and get some of these answers for you guys, hopefully by the end of this video. So don't go anywhere, we're going to be right back. All right, so like I said, I'm here at a Costco parking lot, which happens to have a dirt lot right behind it. I figured it'd be a good setting for this video. But before we get into the trucks themselves, I want to introduce you guys to my best friend here. This is my best friend, Brad Rodecker.
What's going on, YouTube?
So the reason why I have Brad with me today is because he actually owns both of these trucks. Not just one of them, but he owns both of these trucks. Before we get into each vehicle individually, I do need to say that the long travel vehicle used to belong to me. So Brad actually bought it from the guy that I sold it to a couple of years ago, and I'm really happy to see it back in the family. He bought it back. The truck is pretty much in the same condition as when I sold it, so it's really cool to have that vehicle back here, and we're using it for this video. So always super awesome, super fun. We're gonna get into basically what a mid-travel versus a long travel suspension setup is like. And since your truck, the one that you built back in the day over here, is mid-travel,
Yep.
and now that you have my old truck, which is long travel, I wanted to get your input on what your feeling was between the two. Now, I've owned a mid-travel setup on this exact truck before I went long travel.
That's right.
And I know what the differences are like, but it's been about 5 or 6 years since I've had a mid-travel truck. And since you kind of daily drive one of them and the other one you use for the dirt, I wanted to get your input on what you felt the differences were.
Okay.
Cool?
Yeah.
Let's get into the individual pieces of these trucks. We'll kind of dissect them first one by one, then we'll get into the topic of what the differences, the pros, the cons are. Okay, so starting things off here, Brad, we have a 2008
Toyota Tacoma, four-wheel drive.
Four-wheel drive. By the way, these are both four-wheel drive trucks. They're both second generation Tacoma, so that's why we're using them as a comparison too.
Both four-wheel drive Tacoma, same engine, just different suspension. One's a long bed, one's a short bed.
Yeah, which won't make much of a difference to the purpose of suspension in this video. So tell me a little bit about what your truck, well, they're both your trucks, but I'm going to keep calling it your truck for this video.
Yeah. It's so weird, you know.
I know, I haven't gotten...
Your truck is my truck.
I haven't got used to the fact that he owns my old truck yet, so I keep calling it my truck, and I keep calling this one his. So for this video, if you hear that, just know that that's where that's coming from.
It's just as weird for me, too. But we'll get right into it. This is the suspension, the mid-travel suspension on this truck are Icon 2.5-inch extended travel coilovers with reservoirs.
Okay.
So when I take a look inside the
fender well
here, we'll show you what we got.
So there's the Icon coilover, and you also have an upper control arm on here,
yep,
which is covered in grease at the moment. But
yep, not the best, not the prettiest looking control arm right now. But
that's a uniball upper control arm, and you have a coilover, which is pretty much the basics of a mid-travel setup, right? And you're running, this is a 285/75/16, so right about a 33-inch tire.
Right.
This is the Nitto Ridge Grappler, which I love very much. If you guys have seen my own Toyota, they're
absolutely
awesome,
one of my favorite tires.
Yeah. So you got the 33-inch tires, you got the coilovers from Icon with the reservoir, and you have the upper control arm.
And you can get the extended travel coilovers and not have to do the upper control arms from what I remember, but you can't get as much travel out of it. So to do a mid-travel setup, you need to have an upper control arm that it's aftermarket. So that's what the All-Pro upper control arm is for.
Right, and they're also uniball, which gives you a better travel path when you're, you know, extreme droop and extreme bump. It's going to be better than a ball joint. The ball joint factory upper arms will wear out a lot faster.
Right, exactly. We still have lower control arms, stock lower control arms on this truck, but they have worked just fine. And that was going to be later in the upgrades, or maybe just going long travel.
A lot of guys run mid-travel setups with aftermarket lower control arms as well. You can do a uniball on the lower control arm where it attaches to the spindle, and what that does is, again, it is a smoother travel path. The joint itself is a lot stronger than a ball joint, but for all intents and purposes, a lower control arm that's factory is still considered mid-travel in at least the Tacoma and 4Runner world, I would say. Maybe some other platforms, they would still kind of call this like lifted or stock, but I think this is pretty much unanimously mid-travel in the Toyota world. So, and you got some rock sliders on here. You have a custom front bumper, some lights, ditch lights here. You got a roof rack. He's got a couple of max track boards up there. Let's talk about the rear suspension for a minute, because that's equally as important when it comes to mid-travel versus long travel, right?
Something I didn't know until I got a long travel truck.
You know what? That's the mistake that a lot of us made. I did the same thing. I bought a long travel front end thinking I was Robbie Gordon going out there. And
then you figure out that you actually need to do the back end
first,
or the front end. But that's why everybody's, driving around like this, so they do the front end first. Right?
So if you can't afford to do both, I suggest doing the rear first.
Do the rear first. It's much better.
So
the rear is it's pretty simple. We just have oh gosh, who makes that leaf pack?
All Pro?
It used to be All Pro. I'm not sure if that's All Pro now.
It's an Expedition aftermarket leaf.
It's an All Pro Expedition pack.
Yeah.
And it's all we have back here is stock bumps, All Pro Expedition pack, a U-bolt flip kit, and the Icon 2.5 inch. These might even be 2.0s.
Those are 2.0.
These are 2.0s, sorry. Shocks with reservoirs.
Yeah. So one thing important at what Brad just said is the U-bolt flip kit. On the Tacoma, the factory U-bolts actually go from the top down, and it actually has the exposed ends of these threaded rods facing the bottom of facing the ground, essentially, right?
That's correct.
And that creates some clearance issues when you're off-roading. A lot of people, it's the first thing they hit. Yeah, they'll bend a U-bolt, or they'll break some of the threads, and then you're gonna have a hard time getting those off later.
Exactly.
So this kit here is a U-bolt flip kit, and what it does is it basically just flips the whole system around so that it bolts with a plate on top of the leaf spring instead of on the bottom. So that way it keeps everything nice and tucked up, and you don't have to worry about hitting anything. Kind of a peripheral thing you can do to a stock truck, but mid-travel truck's definitely something good to have. Yeah,
definitely good to have, because most people doing mid-travel stuff are probably doing mainly rock crawling or the occasional, dirt scooting around or something like that.
Yeah, but a lot of like camping stuff, just easy trail riding. Exactly. That's really what mid-travel is for with these trucks anyway. Right. Now the leaf pack that you have is a huge improvement over the factory leaf pack.
Huge improvement, because it gives you that lift in the back. It gives you can have a little bit more weight, and as a result, you can't do that with your stock leaf pack unless you add a block or
add a leaf or something.
Add a leaf or something like that. And I did have add a leaf before and another leaf pack, but the stock leaf pack just kind of flattens out, and you need something a little bit stronger. So for this mid-travel build, we went with something that could handle a little bit more weight and raise it up higher as well.
What consists of an off-road leaf pack like this? It's basically got more leaves in it than the factory leaf pack has. They're actually stronger, and it's got a bigger arch to it, so they're arched more than a factory leaf pack, and that's what gives you the lift. Sometimes you can get them with a progressive rate so that they actually get stiffer as you compress it more, so at the very top end of the travel it's nice and smooth on the road, but when you really need that stiffness in the spring, it's there. So that's what's good about a progressive pack. This Expo pack is designed to hold a lot more weight in the bed of the truck than a factory leaf pack is, especially when you're out there and you're using all that rear travel that you need. So it's really cool to see these packs out there. A lot of guys run them. I know a lot of guys that have a lot of weight in the bed of their trucks. They have maybe a rooftop tent, they carry a lot of tools, spare tire, full-size spare in the back, extra fuel cans, all that stuff adds up. So having that extra leaf pack beefiness in there, for lack of a better word, is always a good thing when you're going to build a mid-travel truck. So Brad's got the Expo pack. He has the Icon 2.0 series, the VS aluminum series 2.0 Icon shocks, and these do just fine for what he does with this truck. If you want to go a little bit faster and you want to use the truck a little bit harder, you can easily do a 2.5 inch shock in the back, and it gives you a little bit more shock oil in that body to keep it from fading in the dirt when you're going over big bumps at a fast rate of speed. So, and then you've also got a rear bumper that's steel here, obviously to help with like hitting rocks when you come off of rocks and stuff. And again, more weight you're adding to the rear end.
Yep, you need a little bit of weight in the rear end, definitely, so you can keep from bucking all over the place or whatever have you. I've also gotten rear-ended with this bumper. I've had people hit me with the front bumper. Metal bumpers are really nice.
Good to have. Yeah, and sliders too. Sliders keep you from getting door dings.
Unfortunately, I found that out the hard way a little too late. In this parking lot.
Really?
Actually, yeah.
Oh, that's where this happened?
That's where this came from, right here.
Oh, man.
If I had the slider, that rogue concrete post wouldn't have hit me.
It jumped out of nowhere, man.
It just came and hit me, and if I had this slider, oh boy, that would have
saved your butt.
Would have saved me.
Okay, so here's a good example of a mid-travel truck, and now the crown jewel. Just kidding.
Not in front of the kids, man. Not in front of them.
So this here is my old truck. This is what used to be dubbed the Rebel Taco. I don't even know what we call it these days. Just Fiona.
It's more of like the conformist taco now. It's less rebellious.
So I'm gonna let you take the wing on this one too. Just tell me what's going on with this front suspension.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
For this truck, we've got the Total Chaos 3.5 inch over kit, which has the upper control arms, the lower control arms, and the extended axle shafts. It all comes as a kit, and take a look.
Yeah. So this kit is like Total Chaos's top of the line system for the Tacoma. Again, like I said, lower control arms with uniballs, upper control arms with uniballs, King coilovers 2.5 with their proprietary length and valving and spring rate. It's also got a tie rod extension so you can get your steering to be correct with 3.5 inches over. And then I've also added a couple of weld-on goodies to the front end of this truck too. It's got
a little bit of
a couple of gussets, so you can talk about those for a second here.
Yep. We got these gussets going on here. This is gusseted, the upper control arm mount, I can't remember.
The coil bucket,
the coil bucket is gusseted as well, which you'll find out why that's important later.
Yeah, so this upper control arm actually bolts through the back of the coil bucket, and these brackets here, although they look like they're factory, they should be, those aren't there from the factory. So that mount for the upper control arm bolts over there usually just bolts, it just welded to the coil bucket itself, and adding those gussets really gives it the support it needs on the outsides. It's also got spindle gussets. I don't know if you guys can see it with this shot, but I'll try to move to the front here. And you can see that gusset on the spindle. What that does is it really just beefs up the spindle itself. And then there's of course the cam tab gussets, which are on the front cam tabs. Right. As you guys can see, right there, there's a couple of welded on blocks to the left and right of the cam bolts. And what that does for you, thank you for the flashlight. And what that does for you is, I guess basically before I had those, after every wheeling trip, I'd have to go and align the truck.
Oh yeah, and I still do with this one.
Do you?
All the time.
Yeah.
I have to align it all the time.
The steering wheel gets knocked out of balance or alignment, and the front end's walking all over the place. But after I put those on, I had the truck for 2.5 years. I never had to align it again.
It's like night and day difference.
Yeah, pretty awesome stuff from Total Chaos. Yep. Again, these are add-ons that they put onto the kit. So yeah, that's the front end. Obviously, it's got a big, heavy front bumper on it with a winch, courtesy of Harbor Freight Tools. Yeah, you know, the Badland 12.5
this thing's
Apex winch. Yeah,
it's pretty bad. It's
pretty awesome. Pretty awesome winch up front. So again, it's got a lot of weight up front, and these 8-inch King coilovers with a 700-pound coil spring really help keep that front end up and high. As you guys can see, just one more shot here. Longer control arms. It's also got a limit strap, which we forgot to talk about.
Limit strap, right? Because you can overextend yourself even with long travel.
So having that limit strap right there is going to help, you know, keep everything.
Bump stops, actually.
It's got bump stops too. Yeah, it's got a bump stop extension. Yeah, those are not stock. So good things to mention on the front long travel system for the Tacoma. Obviously nowadays they have a bunch of different options for long travel. They have like the slimmer lower control arms now. They have a 2-inch kit as well as a 3.5-inch kit. So there's a couple of options there. This is the big boy 3.5-inch kit. And that's what we have on this truck here today. And you're also running tire size. Apparently that's a big thing for people.
Right.
To run a 35-inch tire, you do need the long travel suspension, but you also need the fiberglass fenders.
Right.
So
you can run 35s with the mid-travel truck, but you're going to be doing a lot of chopping,
a lot of cutting.
Still going to be rubbing.
Yeah.
You can look all over, say, Tacoma World, a good forum, and you can find lots of people trying to do that, and it still rubs. So.
Yeah. Do yourself a favor, if you're going to go with 35s, go with the long travel system, at least a 2-inch long travel system.
Yep.
With fenders, you might be able to clear 35, but with the 35 and the 3.5-inch kit with the big fenders on there, you'll definitely be able to run a 35-inch tire. So these are a 35, 12, 50, 17, I think. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And this is the Terra Grappler G2. This is Nitto's new all-terrain tire. You had some track time with these tires recently. How'd you like that?
They're awesome. They're fantastic.
You won that race with these tires.
I did.
Now, with rear suspension and long travel, there's quite a bit of a difference from factory. It's not just so much of a bolt-on kind of system like the Total Chaos 3.5-inch front kit is. There are a few options out there for kind of a kit long travel system for the rear end of this truck, but when I built it, there was nothing like that out there. Now the stuff I'm talking about is like DMZ. They actually make a leaf pack for this that runs a longer shock on it with a bed cage, and that will get you long travel numbers, which I think for this truck, anything over 14 or 15 inches is considered long travel, I would say. For this particular setup here, I'll get into what the different components are of the long travel rear suspension on this truck and why it makes things a lot harder to install than just a simple mid-travel setup on the rear end of a Tacoma. So first and foremost, let's talk about the leaf pack. There's a major difference between this leaf pack and the leaf pack that's on your other truck.
Right. Well, besides having I think it's got a few more leaves, but
definitely
it's also a spring under kit as opposed to sitting on top of the axle.
Yeah.
So take a look at that.
Yeah.
I really like that.
So I'll show you guys what that looks like. This is a spring under setup. Like Brad was mentioning, the springs actually go underneath the rear axle. And you might be asking yourself, why would you want to give yourself more stuff underneath the axle and kill your clearance? Well, the answer to that is that this system actually gives you more droop and allows for more bump travel as the suspension cycles upwards. You don't have as much stuff in the way on top of the axle. You can actually get as much bump as you can out of it. So this is a custom Deaver leaf spring pack that I purchased this truck a few years ago, and it's got a lot more leaves in it. It's got a lot more arch to it, and it uses the factory front hanger, which is kind of cool. You don't have to relocate the front hanger on this guy. It does use the factory rear shackle position as well. However, as you can see, the shackle is not stock. That is a fabricated shackle that I had made out of chromoly, and it's a lot stronger. It does have some clearance issues with the frame there, which we didn't see until after we put it on, but it's since self-cleared.
It fixed itself.
Yeah. So we kind of left it alone, as you guys can see right there. But again, this was kind of a homebrew setup, and it was like years before anyone had like a kit out for the rear end.
Right. So
and
in 2014?
14, yeah, probably somewhere around then. Yeah, there wasn't really much out there in the way of long travel for the rear suspension on Tacoma. It's got a factory Tacoma rear axle, the same as the other truck. So all that stuff's the same. However, in order to be able to make the most out of your spring under kit, you can't run a factory shock in a factory location.
Heck
so
no.
On your truck here, as you can see, the factory shock location is on the frame right there, and it's pretty low. You can run almost a little over an OEM size shock.
Right.
But in order to really take advantage of the amount of travel that you can get out of this setup, which is right about 16 to 18 inches, depending on what kind of shock you run, you have to run a longer shock. And the way you run a longer shock is by running it on a bed cage. So as you guys can see here, this truck here has a bed cage that protrudes from the bed. It's all welded to the frame on both ends, the front and the back here. And this is where the shocks mount. This is a 16-inch King triple bypass 2.5 diameter shock. These allow you to use up a lot more travel, and it allows you to actually adjust the valving pretty easily with the bypass tubes that are on there. And you can see here, they've been rubbed by the tire a little bit. That's because they're outboard of the frame, but these are the bypass tubes that you can adjust here, and you can change your valving almost on the fly. Not really on the fly, but you can do it out in the desert if you need to.
You don't have to take it to a shop.
Right, you don't have to take them off the truck.
Right,
you can adjust them right there. Yeah. So
do it out there.
Yeah, so long travel rear end on a Tacoma typically involves a spring under system like this, a bed cage, taller shocks. You don't have to go with the bypass, but it's definitely a nice option.
Right.
And then I've also done a bump stop on here, which is actually Frenched into the frame. As you can see, the bump stop is right along the frame here, and it makes contact with the top of the axle here with the pad down there, and that's for those really hard hits, which I don't think I've hit those things very often, maybe once or twice, but
I might have hit them in Glen Helen, but
yeah, you probably did.
Probably hit them out there.
Yeah. But I mean, it's always a good kind of insurance to have, so that you're not smacking your axle onto your frame.
Yeah.
You know,
If
so
the time that it comes and you take a really hard hit, you're gonna wish those were there.
yeah, so that's a hydraulic bump stop from King. It's a 2.0 diameter, 2-inch stroke. Pretty nice bump stop there. Again, Frenched into the frame, so you can air them up with nitrogen the same way you do with the shock here with the reservoirs, and they work just the same as the shock, just with a lot more compression in them. So.
Right.
This truck, again, has fiberglass fenders in the back because it allows for the 35-inch tire to really be able to tuck up in there as much as it can. With a factory fender, there's no way that big tire would tuck up in there.
Absolutely not. I mean,
Yeah.
you see the tire right now is already pretty much
It's like flush with the fender. Yeah.
And you have on the other truck, stock fenders.
Are they sticking out?
I think there's wheel spacers on the back here, but they're only an inch
Yeah.
wheel spacers.
But it definitely sticks out
Yeah.
past the fender.
So if you were to have the same system here, that fender would go bye-bye.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
already having problems with this one. I should say the tires didn't like the fenders very much, so that's why the fender flares
The flares are gone.
The flares are gone because the tires didn't like them.
Okay, so yeah, fiberglass makes things a little bit easier in the ways of clearance. This also has a custom high clearance rear bumper. Again, a lot of weight back here. Helps the rear end kind of cycle, and it helps it keep the ride nice and smooth while you're off-roading.
Weight is a lot more important for pre-runner-esque.
Right.
As opposed to the mid-travel. You needed a lot more in the rear end for this truck than the other one.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so now that we've shown you guys both the trucks, kind of the similarities and differences between a mid-travel setup and a long travel setup on a Tacoma 4-wheel drive, we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of running each. So obviously, in the name itself, long travel sounds a lot better, right? When you go off-roading, you want to have the most wheel travel as you can get. That makes things smoother over harsher surfaces, gives you better articulation when you're in the rocks, and it just looks cooler because it's wider and it looks like, you know, trophy truck, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, or Baja truck. I've heard that term used before, but a wider stance just kind of looks really good. However, it doesn't come without its cons. There's a lot of things that you have to do to get a long travel setup to work properly on a truck. I don't care what truck you're talking about, Tacoma, Ranger, you know, Chevy Colorado, whatever you got out there, Silverado. There's a lot of more work that needs to be done to make a long travel system work on a truck like that than just a simple mid-travel setup. So today we're talking about the Tacoma, and as far as the long travel setup goes, I would say the pros are pretty obvious.
Yeah, well, the pros are, how do I put it this way? I've been able to do a lot more in that truck than I have in this truck. And at least I've been able to do some of the same things I used to do in the mid-travel truck without it hurting as bad. Because almost always the tires will rub, or I can feel that thing bump out and hit full compression, whereas the other one, it just soaks it right up.
Yeah. A little bit more peace of mind when you're doing some way more crazy stuff out there. Long travel systems, for as far as the front system goes, like I said, the Total Chaos kit is for the most part bolt on. You just got to take the control arms off, you got to take the shocks off, you got to take the CV axle out, the steering, and then just bolt everything else back on. If you want to have the extra protection that I have on there as far as the gussets go, you got to do all the welding, right? So that's a lot of welding right there by itself. A lot more time to put on that system. Another one that I have to talk about is fiberglass. I mean, that's a huge jump for a lot of people, is they don't want to go and take their factory fenders off, buy some fiberglass from a company, and then they have to sand things down, drill holes through the fiberglass, make sure they get it to fit correctly, and then after all that, you got to go paint it, and that's like, you're talking $1,000 minimum for paint matching fenders and bedsides.
Right.
So you have to do that.
And the cost of the fenders as well.
Right, of course, yeah. And then you also have to make your fuel filler work and the door for the fuel filler to work. There's a lot of little things that go into making fiberglass functional, and you're never going to get it to fit like OEM fenders and body panels, but they're going to get close, you know. But to get that way, you're spending a lot of money and a lot of time to have that happen.
Right.
So fiberglass is a really big I guess factor when it comes into doing a long travel system on a Tacoma, or any truck really, that needs a wider stance that can benefit from the fiberglass. We can move on to the rear end. Obviously the cons of the rear end is there's a ton of fabrication needed to make a rear end of it work. I know that these days there's probably some kits out there like the DMZ spring under kit, which sells you everything you need, so you don't need to go and piece everything individually, which is fantastic, because trust me, there was no like solid concrete information on this stuff when I was looking for it back in the day, and now that you have that resource, it makes things a lot easier. But it doesn't change the fact that you do have to modify your vehicle in a pretty extended way. You have to actually weld to the frame. You're cutting through your bed to fit shocks through it, so you're losing, you know, that part of your bed. You have dust coming up from those holes where you're cutting through.
Right. Some
people, you know, they have a 5-foot bed like this,
right,
and if the bed cage isn't really set up correctly, you're losing a lot of bed space for like actually putting stuff in the bed, right?
That, yes.
So I'm sure you know
I have like a 4-foot, maybe 3-foot bed now.
Right.
And I've got a 6-foot on the other one.
And if you have a full-size spare tire back there, a 35-inch spare tire,
there's no room for anything.
Good luck. You got no room for it. You can't even put an easy up or a cooler or nothing back there. You got to get real creative with the way you're going to mount stuff in the back of that truck. So that's another big con for a lot of people when they're going to be doing long travel system. They just think, oh, it's, you know, going to be so much better. But these kind of peripheral issues that are revolving around that are some of the things you have to think about before you go ahead and do that.
A pro of the mid-travel setup is most of that, if not all of it. The suspension could be done in a day in your garage or on your driveway.
Whatever. Yep.
Yeah, the long travel is going to take a few more.
Yeah, if you don't have a shop, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to do that. Definitely.
Yeah. You're going to need somebody who can weld, or maybe if you can weld yourself, you can do it. But yeah.
Heck, I had a shop. Yeah. It was on a lift when I was installing mine, and it took us 3 days working 6 hours a day to get the whole thing done, and that's just the front end. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into getting that to work. So
yeah, as you can see, it wasn't looking too appealing to me with the mid-travel setup working just fine at the time.
He didn't want to make the jump.
I didn't want to make the jump. Yeah, pun intended.
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask you, Brad, is like, what about drivability? I daily drove this truck from bone stock up through mid-travel, and then after long travel, I still daily drove it for about 1.5 years after that. But I never really had a mid-travel truck and a long travel truck at the same time to compare how they daily drive on the street. So
right. I end up kind of going back and forth between them. I'll drive one for a week and drive the other for a week, or I might let somebody borrow one and I forget that I have it and I drive the other one. Mm-hmm. What ends up happening is I like one almost more than the other each time for specific reasons. Like I drive the mid-travel truck and I go around, and it's great. It's easy to drive and it's very useful. But I won't take it out to the desert. You know, I won't take it out to do what I can with the long travel truck. If I'm going to go out off-roading, I'm going to be taking that one. But when I take the long travel truck out, I like that it's a lot stiffer. The spring under axle kit can have me wrap around corners, no problem, and I just get used to driving it. It's just a little bit stiffer, and I just forget how bulky it almost feels. So then I hop back into the other truck and I realize this feels more like a stock truck almost. It's softer, it's easier to drive around in, and it's just more comfortable in certain ways. Mm-hmm. But, you know,
your taste is going to differ between everybody else, but I personally didn't have any problem dailying a long travel truck. Some people may think it's too wide to park in places, but even here in Southern California, where arguably we have the smallest parking spaces in the country, I can still park that truck no problem, and it's a full 7 inches wider over stock.
Yeah.
So it's pretty nice for a daily driver too. I wouldn't discount it just for that. So that's about it for the pros and cons of a long travel versus a mid-travel setup on a Tacoma. Now, which one's right for you? That's going to really come down to what your needs are for the truck. If you are somebody who likes to go fast off-roading through the desert like I do, long travel might be the way to go. If you're someone who's more reserved when you go off-roading, maybe you're just going camping up in the woods here and there, you don't need all that articulation, you don't really want to dive into all the nuances of building a long travel truck, like welding to it and cutting through your bed, and you know, there's a lot of things you got to do on the long travel system. If you don't want to get into all that, a mid-travel is definitely going to be a better setup for you. But you know, all that's going to come down to what you want to do with the truck, how much money you want to spend on it, and how devoted you are to actually working on this thing, because again, one of them is a lot easier than the other to work on. So there's a couple of things you have to consider before you make that decision, but it's definitely something you want to thoroughly think about before you go with one or the other, because once you're into it, you're into it. But I gotta say, long travel is the way for me. What about you?
You know what, man? I don't like to say this in front of the other one, but long travel was definitely the way to go. Not in front of Bree. Not in front of Bree. Definitely, once you hit that first floating section and you feel all the suspension work, it all makes sense.
Yeah, and I've had the thing up in mountain trails in the same way, rock trails the same way. I have yet to find a big enough con to dissuade me from buying a long travel system on my next truck versus a mid-travel system. So let's put it that way.
Yeah. Just allows you to go more places.
Pros outweigh the cons for us, but that may be different for you guys. So make sure you guys think about all the things that we talked about in this video before you make that decision. All right, well, hopefully the pros and cons of going through these two trucks is going to help you guys come to your decision. If you guys have any questions or comments, please drop it in the comment section below. I'd be happy to go in there and answer anything for you. I'm pretty versed when it comes to Toyota trucks, but I do know quite a bit about other makes and models as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys might have. That's going to do it for us today on Chasing Dust. I appreciate you guys sticking with us. Special thanks to my buddy Brad for bringing his two trucks out here and helping us kind of go through both of these truck suspension parts.
You're welcome.
Well, once again, guys, Matt McAdam here, your truck editor at Driving Line. I'll see you guys on the next one.